Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today we discuss if it was the right decision for the Indianapolis Colts to bench first-round pick Anthony Richardson and start veteran quarterback Joe Flacco in his place moving forward. This is something that's led to kind of a lot of discussions online about whether or not this was the right move for Indianapolis to make because the Colts, knowing Anthony Richardson and how few games he played in college, it was kind of like, hey, what did you expect? This guy was going to be a quarterback that is a raw prospect that is going to have a lot of growing pains early on in his career, more likely than not. And he's a guy that's going to have to learn on the job. So the fact that the Colts are going ahead and benching Anthony Richardson here is also leaving to a lot of kind of stuff up in the air of like, hey, is this like a move that is like a Bryce Young move where you're just going to be moving off of Anthony Richardson for now on and you're kind of like, hey, we're out on this guy? Or is this just a thing where the Colts are like, hey, this is just going to be like a 1 or 2 game thing and then Anthony Richardson will be right back into the lineup? It's kind of like up in the air because Jeff Saturday kind of said the latter of like, and he's got a lot of connections with the Colts where it's like, hey, this might just be like a short-term thing and Anthony Richardson's still the guy for the long term. But Adam Schefter tweeted something that was kind of like, eyebrow raising that led to like, hey, maybe this isn't just a short-term kind of like move here. So Schefter tweeted, a change for the Colts. Indianapolis is benching former first-round pick Anthony Richardson and turning to veteran Joe Flacco, sources tell ESPN. Coaches met this morning and made the seismic organizational decision to change QBs. Seismic organizational decision. Now, is this Schefter maybe just adding a little bit more zest to the report than is needed? Very possibly, but because of that, in this video here today, we're going to talk about the reasons, because I'm kind of torn on this decision, the reasons why the Colts should stay with Anthony Richardson and then why the Colts should move off of Anthony Richardson or why they have moved off Anthony Richardson, at least for the short term. So to start off here, Anthony Richardson, why the Colts should have stayed with him. As we said at the top, Anthony Richardson only played 13 games in college. Very raw quarterback prospect. This is a guy that's going to, not just learn the quarterback position on the NFL level, but he's got to learn the quarterback position just in general. The fact that he's 22 years old, we have 3 quarterbacks that were taken in the first round of the draft 2024 that are 24 years old. Again, Anthony Richardson taken in the 2023 draft. We have 3 college quarterbacks right now. Carson Beck, the quarterback of Georgia, is 6 months younger than Anthony Richardson. Shedeur Sanders is 3 months older than Anthony Richardson. Cam Ward is 3 days older than Anthony Richardson. And all of them have more starts in college than Anthony Richardson has combined in the NFL and college combined. So, again, Anthony Richardson, very, very raw quarterback prospect here. I also saw Daniel Jones is going to be starting in his 71st NFL game this upcoming weekend. And kind of another argument, too, is like, hey, you're the Colts. Yeah. And Shane Steichen alluded to this, talking about the decision to bench Anthony Richardson's like, hey, Joe Flacco gives us a better chance to win games now. Well, the problem with that logic, if you're talking about the long-term viability of Anthony Richardson, and using that high of a draft pick on somebody like this is like, hey, this guy, yeah, sure, he doesn't have the ceiling of, he doesn't provide the ceiling to the Colts right now that Joe Flacco may be able to, and Joe Flacco might be able to win more games this year than Anthony Richardson, but Joe Flacco isn't a long-term, starter for the Indianapolis Colts. And yeah, okay, maybe Joe Flacco can have the Colts win 9-10 games this year, but then what? Then what? Okay, you make the playoffs, and then you get your cheeks clapped by the Ravens or the Bills or the Chiefs. Like, okay, cool, you can make the playoffs, but wouldn't it be better to have Anthony Richardson stay in, take his lumps, and, maybe you guys, instead of going 10-7, you go 7-10, or you go 8-9, or whatever. So that's kind of like the reasons there, too. And obviously, too, this isn't a Bryce Young situation. Anthony Richardson is a prospect that, Bryce Young looked like a JV quarterback out there playing in the NFL. Anthony Richardson looks like Cam Newton. He's got the measurables of Cam Newton. He's got the measurables of a guy like Khalil Mack. He's an incredible, credible athlete with an absolute cannon of an arm, and the talent is there. And it's just kind of like, hey, what can we get out of this talent? Like the physical attributes are there for him to maybe potentially be something special at the quarterback position, which is why he got drafted as high as he did. But I think the reason that the Colts ultimately made this decision, if we're going to switch to that part of this conversation, is Shane Steichen can't afford to lose the locker room. And as much as us fans or people in general just online, playing like, imaginary NFL GM, have the idea of like, hey, Anthony Richardson needs to go out there. He needs to play. He needs to improve. You invested this high, draft pick in him, put him out there and, let him fail. The problem with that is all the players that are on the Colts, or probably a decent chunk of them, don't care about that. They don't care about Anthony Richardson getting better. They care about winning football games. They care about doing things to meet their contract incentives, feeding their families, getting contract extensions, getting new contracts in free agency. They care about short-term success. They don't care about what Anthony Richardson doing all this stuff now may or may not make Anthony Richardson a better quarterback heading into the next year. No, they care about this season. And if they think Joe Flacco is going to have a better do a better job getting them to win football games, and they all know that, Shane Steichen can't afford to, keep Anthony Richardson in, because he might lose the locker room, and that might also hurt him not only for this year with the players in the locker room, but also next year, because probably a decent amount of these guys are going to stay on the team going into next year. So that is reason number one. Reason number two, Anthony Richardson is playing like the worst quarterback in the NFL right now. He is not playing well. Guys, his completion percentages are on par with Tim Tebow. That is how inaccurate he is as a quarterback right now. He is not playing well whatsoever. He's being completely inaccurate. He's overthrowing guys. Now, I know I saw like a compilation of like, a bunch of like drops from the Colts. Some of them are kind of questionable drops. So I'm not saying that, the receivers are 100% playing like, perfect right now. But I do think he's got like some talent at the wide receiver position, and Anthony Richardson's just not, for the most part, not making good decisions at the quarterback position. He has only had one game in the 10 games that he's played in his entire career, one game where he has started and then finished a game where he is finished with a completion percentage over 50%. Start and finished a game, completion percentage over 50%. All the other games, I think it's like 6 other ones, completion percentage under 50%. There's a criticism from Colts fans of like, oh my God, it's Shane Steichen's fault. Shane Steichen isn't putting Anthony Richardson in the best situation to succeed. They need to start playing him like Cam Newton or Jalen Hurts. Well, the only problem with that, guys, is, well, he's trying to, but also Anthony Richardson started 10 games. 3 of those games he left it due to injury. If you look at each play he was injured on, they were designed runs. Each play he was injured on was a designed run. So it's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't with Anthony Richardson. Do you, try to have him play like a Cam Newton or a Jalen Hurts and run the ball a lot, or a Lamar Jackson? Well, if you do that, you're going to potentially have him get long-term, have a long-term injury, and you don't want his career to turn out like RG3's. So that's kind of the risk that you're running there with Anthony Richardson if you're playing him more like that. And again, too, he still does like do designed runs with Anthony Richardson. It's not like they've, gone cold turkey on those. I thought about part of this discussion here is like, well, maybe there's like a self-esteem, confidence issue with Anthony Richardson. The fact that the Colts decided to, sign Joe Flacco in the first place, who is one of the most popular backups in the NFL right now. And the Colts last year with Anthony Richardson missing like 3/4 of the year, almost made the playoffs with his backup. So maybe there's like an added pressure for Anthony Richardson. Again, we all have like, egos, and we all have self-esteem, and having like, a competent backup like Joe Flacco, maybe the idea of it isn't working out to the way that you thought it would. So I kind of thought like, well, wait, what would happen if the Colts decided to like have like a backup quarterback situation like the Dolphins have, where they just have like Tua, and then they have a bunch of like bleh guys that when Tua's out, the team is like an absolute mess. Well, the problem with that is, well, what happens if Anthony Richardson misses as much games in year 2 as he did in year 1? If that was the case, then the Colts, if they had like a crappy backup situation, are going to go like 4-13, 5-12, and you don't want that if you're the Colts and their coaching staff, because then that's when people in the front office get fired. That's when people on the coaching staff get fired, and the people that are controlling the roster, controlling the team, don't want to get fired. So that's why you keep Joe Flacco. That's why you get a competent backup, especially when you have a guy, Anthony Richardson. Again, 3 out of his 10 starts had to leave due to injury. Couldn't finish due to injury. Here's where things start getting bad for Anthony Richardson there. Again, you can go out and you can find all the completion percentage stuff like that with him, and just kind of how bad and poorly he's been playing. There's also a thing too with him where it's like he's had a decent amount of fumbles, and a lot of those fumbles aren't like guys coming in and like, like sacking him and he's fumbling. A lot of them are just quarterback, halfback exchanges on like RPOs, and those are really kind of clunky and bad. But if you're looking at notable high drafted quarterbacks that have been benched in the last few years, Bryce Young, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Will Levis, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett. That's not a good list to be on. What are the stories of a guy that got benched early on in his career that just missed a few games, and then it's like 4 years later, it's like, oh, look at this guy. He's like a pretty good player now. He's like a top 10 guy. That's usually not how these stories go. Usually it's like he's benched, and then if he ever comes back, it doesn't turn out the best. That's not usually how these usually aren't success stories when a guy's getting benched in the middle of his second year for poor performance. That's not usually how this stuff goes. And the Colts have had this guy in their building for like 18 months now, a year and a half now. So the fact that they're moving off of him right now is kind of alarming. I'm sounding a lot of alarm bells for potential Anthony Richardson bust potential here. And that is something that I don't like saying. This is a guy I drafted on my fantasy team. I thought he was going to potentially have a very good year, and it has not turned out that way. So again, the good side of this isn't a Bryce Young situation where it's like he doesn't have the physical stuff, but right now it looks like he might not have the accuracy stuff and maybe even the mental stuff. The fact that he checked himself out of a game Sunday because he was tired for a play, quarterbacks don't do that. And I know that there has been stuff going around about like, people have been like looking at like Josh Allen's touchdowns throughout the first 10 games of his career and Anthony Richardson's touchdowns in the first few 10 games of his career. And they're like, Josh Allen was like this, athletic guy that was inaccurate early on, and he had similar touchdowns to Anthony Richardson. Means Anthony Richardson's going to be okay. A complete overreaction from the Colts. I think if you're just looking at touchdowns through 10 games and comparing the two, I think you're looking at the game at like a third grade level. If you're just doing that and going, aha. That is why, like, I've always thought it was stupid when I see this stuff about Daniel Jones getting compared to Trevor Lawrence, and they're like the first whatever games of their career matching them up. It's like, okay, so you're saying Daniel Jones is a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence? Trevor Lawrence, disappointing quarterback, disappointing career so far from what we expected of him, the expectations of him. But the idea that Daniel Jones is on par with him and is better than him, or that they're the same, is absolutely stupid. Are you guys watching the games? Again, Anthony Richardson went 2 for 15 in the first half. This dude has completion percentages comparable to Tim Tebow. Again, I wish him the best, but right now it's not looking good for him. It's not looking good for him in the trajectory of his career. Because again, unlike Josh Allen too, if you look at Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen, defensive coach, Anthony Richardson, offensive coach. Anthony Richardson's got good offensive weapons. Now, are they, elite guys? But I like Josh Downs. I think Michael Pittman's been a little disappointing, but I like Michael Pittman. Pierce seems like he's pretty good. They drafted that Mitchell guy from Texas who's good. Jonathan Taylor, running back. Like, there is something to work with here if you're talking about the Indianapolis offense. And again, we'll see how Joe Flacco runs it. Again, 38-year-old Joe Flacco running an offense. That's what the Colts are going with here going forward. So there you have it. That's going to do it for this video here today. If you liked what you saw here today, please hit that like button and hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. That is the number one thing that you can do to help support this show. Please comment to help get this show to reach more people. And feel free to check out other videos on the Sports Detective Podcast channel page. And thank you for watching. We'll talk to you next time.